Hello. Well, this is Memorial Day weekend. This is our 10th Sunday apart. Um, we're meeting on Zoom, and the sermon is online, and we're calling each other, but we're just not at the church worshiping for the 10th Sunday now. And it's Memorial Day, which I always think about my dad on Memorial Day. He was a career Air Force man, Master Sergeant. And when I was 4 years old, he was stationed at Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa. And I remember, very vivid, as a 4-year-old, we went to visit the site where Ernie Pyle, the war correspondent, had been killed and buried on the island of Okinawa. And I remember my dad trying to communicate to me how important he was as he reported on the war, and how important it was that people laid down their life for us. And that made an impression on me even as a 4-year-old. Many years later, my wife and I were in Hawaii, and we visited Punch Bowl. Now, Ernie's remains were removed from Okinawa, and he was brought to Punch Bowl National Cemetery on the island of Oahu. And as I stood at his graveside, I felt like my dad was right there. And I was able to tell my dad that I got the message he was trying to share with me about the importance of people who lay down their life for us, and some understanding of what they go through. So I'm going to read from one of Ernie Pyle's books called Brave Men. And this is an account he has, a first-hand account in Italy during World War II, while our troops were there trying to win freedom. In this war, I have known a lot of officers who were loved and respected by the soldiers under them, but never have I crossed the trail of any man as beloved as Captain Henry T. Waskow of Belton, Texas. Captain Waskow was a company commander in the 36th Division. He had led his company since long before it left the States. He was very young, only in his middle 20s, but he carried in him a sincerity and a gentleness that made people want to be guided by him. After my father, he came next, a sergeant told me. He always looked after us, a soldier said. He'd go to bat for us every time. I've never known him to do anything unfair, said another. I was at the foot of the mule train the night that they brought Captain Waskow down. The moon was nearly full, and you could see far up the trail and even part way across the valley below. Dead men who had been coming down the mountain all evening lashed onto the backs of mules. They came lying belly down across the wooden pack saddles, their heads hanging down on one side, their stiffened legs sticking out awkwardly from the other, bobbing up and down as the mules walked. I don't know who the first man was that was taken off the mule. You feel small in the presence of dead men, and you don't ask silly questions. They slid him down from the mule and stood him on his feet for a moment. In the half-light, he might have been merely a sick man standing there, leaning on the others. Then they laid him on the ground in the shadow of the stone wall alongside the road. We left him there beside the road, that first one, and we all went back inside the cowshed and sat on water cans and lay on the straw, waiting for the next batch of mules. Somebody said the dead soldier had been dead for 4 days, and then nobody said anything more about it. We talked soldier talk for an hour or more. The dead man lay all alone, outside in the shadow of the wall. Then a soldier came into the cowshed and said that there were some more bodies outside. We went out into the road. 4 mules stood there in the moonlight, in the road, where the trail came down off the mountain. The soldiers who had led them stood there waiting. This one is Captain Waskow, one of them said quietly. 2 men unlashed his body from the mule and lifted it off and laid it on the shadow beside the stone wall. Other men took the other bodies off. Finally, there were 5 lying end to end, a long row. You didn't cover up dead men in the combat zones. They just lie there in the shadows until somebody comes after them. The unburdened mules moved off to the olive grove. The men on the road seemed reluctant to leave. They stood around, and gradually I could sense them moving one by one close to Captain Waskow's body. Not so much to look, I think, as to say something in finality to him and to themselves. I stood close by, and I could hear. One soldier came and looked down, and he said out loud, "Damn it." That's all he said, and then he walked away. Another one came, and he said, "Damn it to hell anyway." He looked down for a few last moments, and then he turned and left. Another man came. I think he was an officer. It was hard to tell officers from men in the dim light, for every body was bearded and grimy. The man looked down into the dead captain's face, and then he spoke directly to him, as though he were alive. "I'm sorry, old man." Then the soldier came and stood beside the officer and bent over, and he too spoke to his dead captain, not in a whisper, but awfully tenderly, and he said, "I sure am sorry, sir." Then the first man squatted down, and he reached down and took the captain's hand, and he sat there for a full 5 minutes, holding the dead hand in his own, and looking intently into the dead face, and he never uttered a sound all the time that he sat there. Finally he put the hand down. He reached over and gently straightened the points of the captain's shirt collar, and then he sort of rearranged the tattered edges of the uniform around the wound. And then he got up and he walked away down the road in the moonlight all alone. The rest of us went back into the cowshed, leaving the 5 dead men lying in a line, end to end, in the shadow of the low stone wall. We lay down on the straw in the cowshed, and pretty soon we were all asleep. And so that's something that Ernie Pyle wrote about his experience following the soldiers in Italy during World War II. And like I mentioned, Ernie was killed on the island of Okinawa, and my dad took me to that spot when I was 4 and tried to explain to me the importance of what that meant. And later on in my life, when I was at the Punch Bowl on Oahu and standing by Ernie's graveside there, thinking about my dad and his service to the country and the many men and women who have laid down their lives for you and I, it made me very thankful this Memorial Day for those who gave so much so that we could be free.